Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome back to the lecture 14 of this series on public policy analysis. Hopefully the last lecture was very interesting and enticing, intuitive, and would have woken you up because it contained a lot of stuff, a lot of technical stuff, calculations, which we are now gradually getting into. There will be lectures in between in which we will cover only theory, or the theoretical sides, just to explain things before we jump into the technicalities of graphics and calculations. Perhaps that would be a relief for students who don't like a lot of calculations like me. I didn't like calculations as a student. Some of them I found to be very tedious, but that is the way it is. We have to go through these in order to learn something, in order to learn about public policy analysis. So let's delve into this lecture, but before we do, as always, previous lecture, what we covered, it was all about going through the exercise of calculating the present values and IRR for projects. Remember what we did in the last lecture. We went through a few examples. We went through the calculation of present values and internal rate of returns, and discussed its importance. First one was a hypothetical example of two investments, a bank and a machine, their income streams, the calculation of present values from those income streams, and the internal rate of return calculations. So we made, in the first case, there were two scenarios. One investment was related to a bank, the second was related to a machine, and so we tried to gauge through calculating the present values and the internal rate of return that what that outcome would be, what would it tell about the feasibility of these two comparative investments. And in the end we came to the conclusion, based on IRR and the present values, that the income from machines would certainly represent a good option in this case. But you might also want to remember, as I discussed in length in the previous lecture, that a lot depends upon the preferences of individuals. When we are discussing these kind of investments, we are discussing large scale investments, not small scale investment. For an individual, for a household, it is different because their preferences are different. I gave you the example that of the State Life Insurance Corporation, the kind of the kind of investments that they offer. So they are more like the bank investment, in which you just keep your money. There is an income stream accruing to it. You're not exactly withdrawing it, but their income stream accrues to it. Certain percentage accrues to it, which is the rate of return, which is the rate of profit. Sorry. And based on that, a person who has bought that might be pretty happy about taking out all the money, principal plus the profit, at the end of maybe 10 years, 15 years, because it is his preference. Institutional investors, large-scale investors, large-scale projects, the case is different. The internal rate of return, the present values, they are comparative yardsticks through which the attractiveness of feasibility of a project is measured compared to other projects that are in the pipe, compared to other investments, that are right there, competing with the project that we just want to run. So these form the internal rate of returns, the present values. They form a core concept for investors. They form core calculation for investors, and from the government's point of view, government is also, remember, an investor, because it invests in infrastructure, motorways, other roads, highways, metro projects. These are infrastructures where government is investing. Government is itself an investor. So it is necessary for them to calculate and come up with these kind of IRRs and present values too. They don't necessarily do. In one of the last lectures I mentioned that metro project, there was no study for it. They just went ahead with it. One day we all woke up and just saw the roads being plugged, all roads being plugged, and all the highways being closed, and we learnt that a metro project is underway. Now I'm not sure, I don't think so. In fact, I'm pretty sure that there was no calculation done over here. It was just on a populist basis, an attempt to garner publicity about what we are doing as a politicians, and we are doing something for the betterment of a country and the welfare of the people. So it wasn't anything about IRR or anything like that. Then I gave the example of bonds offered at a discount. And again, when you a lot depended upon the internal rate of return. What we did was, when we calculated that internal rate of return for bonds, which came out to be around, I think, 12.2% or 12.8%. I don't remember exactly, but it was above 12%. That was the rate at which the investor would be comparing his options regarding investment. Should he buy the bond? Should he not buy the bond? Because some other investment, the alternative investment, is offering more in terms of internal rate of return. So that was the reason, or that was the logic in computing the internal rate of return for bonds, and that logic prevails from the investor's point of view. With that, I also discussed another thing. I discussed that if in many cases you wouldn't require the internal rate of returns and present values in the kind of projects that government launches, and these are specifically projects which are for social welfare. For example, helping the poor, the cash transfers under income support program, then the Zakat on Ashur programs. These are not necessarily from an investment point of view. Government doesn't invest for the cause of realizing an income stream in the future. No, it doesn't. It invests or it is an expenditure, it makes an expenditure in lieu of what it sees as social welfare, towards a goal of social welfare, towards improving the lives of downtrodden and poor. So it's also part of public policy, but it doesn't involve these kind of calculations. So hopefully you've understood these concepts, hopefully you've gone through it, try to get a grasp of it, and hopefully I was able to explain them more clearly. So let's move ahead to other examples and see what's in store for us. Second application of internal rate of returns and present values. It's an interesting one. Detecting an economic shortage. How do you detect economic shortage? There are lots of shortages, and we are pretty accustomed to it. In whole of our life in Pakistan, we've been going through this, that there is shortage of this, there is shortage of that. Nowadays there is a shortage of electricity. Then you many times you would have witnessed that there are shortage of simple commodities like rice, like wheat, edible oil, sugar. These are some of the things that I have witnessed in my lifetime being falling short again and again and again. And you can detect an economic shortage by simply watching people, observing people, the queues of the people that are standing in line, long lines. You can perhaps see, you can gauge from that there is perhaps a shortage of that good for which all the people are lining up. You must have seen the lines of at the CNG stations, the compressed natural gas stations. That is due to the shortage. So that's an observation. But not all the shortages are that simple to detect. Shortage might be due to genuine reasons, as in the example of that I just gave you of natural gas. We have a genuine shortage of it. Yes, things are exacerbated by the way that these things are run. By the way, government has tried to tackle this thing, and not just this government, I won't blame this one, but the previous ones, they made a mess out of it. But there is a genuine shortage of gas. So that shows up in internal rate of returns too, as we'll go through this stuff. And then there are some cases that these kind of genuine shortages in terms of goods are a bit hard to detect. And economists try to, yes, one indication is a higher price of a shortage, but these can be internal rate of return in terms of investments can be used to gauge the shortage of a product and its probable profitability. So how do we do that? First of all, in short, an economic shortage implies the shortage in supply of a specific commodity, service, or otherwise. Shortages translate on a high price into a high price since there is less of a product than before while the demand is the same. Again, probably in this lecture or the next lecture, we will go through some of this supply and demand stuff, and I'll try to take you through what kind of variations goes through it. For a person who has already taken economics, it's child's play, but for people who haven't taken economics, they need some background in it, which we will go through it. Anyway, how can IRR be used to detect an economic shortage? The answer lies in the workings of a market economy on the basis of competition. Now, this is a novel concept, laissez-faire economy, let it be open market economy, competition which drives the economy and which drives its factors. So we will definitely be discussing economic principles and their application in policy analysis, especially graphical analysis later on. Yes, we will. But for the moment, a simple explanation would do for this example. In a market economy where competition has its presence, the change in profit rates leads to a change in investment decision and thus in demand in supply. In a competitive economy, in an economy that is working without externalities or other problems, monopolies or such like that, just suffice to say, it would suffice to say that it's a smoothly running economy. In that kind of economy, it is competition has its presence. Where competition has its presence, the change in profit rates, suppose a product suddenly offers more profit than the others, it leads to change in investment decision, because investors are always looking for good opportunities, better opportunities, as we saw in the previous examples when we did the calculations, and thus in demand and supply. So with that change in profitability, there would be changes in other variables too. There would be a change in demand and supply too. Suppose product A, due to a change in circumstances, gains a high price compared to product B. This in turn would induce investor or the producers towards product A, since it is offering a higher profit opportunity. As production of product A picks up, the supply increases. The long run result is that the price of product A will fall to equilibrium level, thus restoring the earlier balance. Now remember, we will go through the graphical analysis. I will take you through this thing about the short run. In the short run, supply, so the investors turning towards the product because of its profitability, and its supply increasing in the medium run, and in the long run, that then due to increased supply, the price comes down to the level where other products are. So it kind of gets even-steven. It's called an equilibrium, where it's the best possible outcome. This is part of the perfect, what I am just describing to you, and we will do in graphical analysis. It's a part of what is called the perfect competition model. As I just said, that there is presence of competition over there and no roadblocks to entry and exit of a firm. In real world there are. It's not so easy, but we are just going through the theoretical stuff to make you understand how IRR could be useful in computing shortages. So anyway, as production of product A picks up, the supply increases. That is the short run, and the medium run, not so long run. But in the long run, the result is that when there is a lot more investment in product A, a lot more people come in, a lot more producers come in and produce the same product, then its price will fall down, because now there is a lot more of that product. Its price was high initially because there wasn't a lot of it and there was a lot of demand for it, but the supply didn't match the demand. Now there is a lot of supply which matches the demand, so the price will definitely come down. That is the long run. Thus, it will restore the earlier balance or the required balance. As the dynamics of probability change, so does the IRR and the opportunity cost of investment scenario. I remember we just said that with change in profitability, there comes changes in demand and supply. So there is change in internal rate of return too, with the change in profitability. The reason, if you remember the previous calculations that we did in the previous lecture, was that change in profitability leads to a change in realization of higher income. When there are more profits to be made, it implies that there would be more income or higher income than we already have. So if then you take out the present value of it or IRR from it, then it would definitely imply, naturally it would imply that the number would be bigger than the one we got previously. So internal rate of return changes too with the change in economic circumstances. As product A becomes pricier or its price goes higher, the opportunity cost for the investor for not investing in this product rises. As a prudent investor, as a rational investor, what would you do when you see that you have a better option for investing than in the one that you are thinking about right now? Naturally, as a rational investor, as a logical investor who is always looking for better profit opportunities, what you would do is you would go for the product that has a better chance of earning higher product, and that product would be the one that has a higher price potential. So it means that the opportunity cost of not investing means the cost to you as an investor, the cost to me as an investor, if I am an investor, and there is a better option right in front of me of gaining a higher percentage of profit or gaining a higher profit. It is right in front of me, and if I am not investing, that is a cost to me. It is costing me because I am investing in a project that offers little return, and compared to this one offers lower return compared to the product A, as in this case. So the opportunity cost rises. In other words, what it means is that the IRR of product A rises. The rate of return for product A rises as its price rises, which makes it more profitable than other alternatives, like product B, suppose, for example. So we would expect investors to pour their money in A's production. Yes, we will. As I said, as a logical investor, one would expect that to happen. As stated above, in the long run, we would expect the prices to fall down as the production of A becomes sufficient to meet the demand and its price comes down. That will be gauged by a gradually falling IRR over the long run. देखें, अभी हमने एक सिनेरियो डिस्कस किया. हमने ये कहा कि जब एक प्रोडक्ट होता है ख़ास, एक कोई भी चीज़ होगी, उसकी कोई इन्वेस्टर देखता है कि उसकी कीमत बढ़ रही है, तो उसकी कीमत बढ़ने के साथ साथ उसका इंटरनल रेट ऑफ रिटर्न भी ज़्यादा होता जाता है. वजह यह है कि जैसे जैसे प्रॉफिट, कीमत बढ़ने की वजह से उसकी प्रॉफिट अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ होती है, जो एक हमारी एक्सपेक्टेशन होती है, जो हम सोचते हैं कि इससे इतना मुनाफा आएगा. अगर कीमत बढ़ती जा रही है इस प्रोडक्ट की और डिमांड भी उसकी है, तो इसका ये मतलब है कि उससे जो हमें मुनाफा हासिल होगा वो भी साथ साथ बढ़ता जाएगा. उसके मुनाफे के बढ़ने के साथ साथ उसके इंटरनल रेट ऑफ रिटर्न भी बढ़ता जाएगा. तो वो एक नेचुरल सी चीज़ है. लेकिन जब बहुत सारे इन्वेस्टर्स एक ऐसी चीज़ की तरफ भागेंगे, उसको ख़रीदने की कोशिश करेंगे या उसको प्रोड्यूस करने की कोशिश करेंगे, जो कि आजकल बड़ी डिमांड में है लेकिन उसकी सप्लाई कम है, सप्लाई और डिमांड में फ़र्क आ रहा है, तो लॉन्ग रन में यानी लंबे अरसे में हम ये एक्सपेक्ट करेंगे कि उसकी जो सप्लाई होगी ज़्यादा इन्वेस्टमेंट की वजह से वो भी ज़्यादा हो जाएगी. वो जितनी डिमांड है, सप्लाई उसको सप्लाई जितनी है वो डिमांड को पूरी कर रही है, अभी नहीं पूरी कर रही इसीलिए कीमत ज़्यादा है। जब पूरी करेगी तो कीमत इतनी ज़्यादा नहीं होगी, वो कम हो जाएगी। तो जैसी कीमत कम होगी उसके साथ उसकी प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी भी कम हो जाएगी, उससे जो मुनाफा आ रहा है वो भी कम होता जाएगा, और उसके साथ साथ इंटरनल रेट ऑफ रिटर्न भी कम होता जाएगा। तो ये देखें, ये एक मैकेनिज्म है कि जिससे इकोनॉमिस्ट ये गेज कर रहे हैं कि हाँ ये एक प्रोडक्ट के इंटरनल रेट ऑफ रिटर्न्स के थ्रू कि क्या शॉर्टेज है या नहीं है। अब ये मैंने आपको एक बेसिक मैकेनिज्म एक्सप्लेन किया कि इस तरह होता है। आई जस्ट एक्सप्लेन टू यू what I meant from this explanation. What I wanted to get to you was what happens in the short run, the not so long run, or the medium run, and in the long run, what we expect to happen in terms of IRR and investment and the provision of a product. Now, what will be intriguing from an economist's point of view is the possibility that IRR of product A does not fall and still remains high in the long run, despite more investment, despite more supply. That will imply two things. One, the market principle of competition are weak, possibly due to the presence of monopoly or oligopoly. And second, there is still shortage of the product, artificially created or otherwise. Thus, the trick over here is to track the IRR over time. Its number in comparison with others will give you a clue to whether a shortage persists or not. अब हमने बात की लॉन्ग रन की, लंबे अरसे की। जैसे जैसे इन्वेस्टर्स आते जाते हैं, जैसे जैसे एक चीज़ में इन्वेस्टमेंट ज़्यादा होती जाती है, तो उसमें हम ये एक्सपेक्ट करते हैं कि उसकी कीमत ज़्यादा कम हो जाएगी लंबे अरसे में, क्योंकि उसकी सप्लाई ज़्यादा होगी। एज इन्वेस्टर्स पोर इन टू द प्रोडक्शन ऑफ दैट थिंग और दैट कमोडिटी विच इज़ इन शॉर्ट सप्लाई, its production would naturally increase because a lot more investors are coming in, and the increase in its production would result in lower prices in the future, and there's a lower internal rate of return. But if it doesn't happen, what if it doesn't happen? It stays, the internal rate of return stays the same or keeps on increasing. And that is intriguing for an economist, because that's an indication that shortage still persists and the price or the product is still sought after. Now, why does that shortage persist, and why are we interested in it? We are interested in it because shortages have a lot of implications. I just told you one of them. We see long lines of long queues for compressed natural gas due to shortages. Now, if 10 years ago, or if some economist or if some analyst had started tracking that rate of return from investment in the CNG sector 10 years ago, then he would have been able to gauge that it's increasing constantly, and that is due to shortages. Now, shortages could be in the further analysis, shortages could be either artificially created, as in the cases of goods like wheat, flour. The other examples that I gave you, sugar, edible oils, most of those are artificially created because the people start, or the sellers start hoarding it. But in cases like compressed natural gas or the provision of natural gas, the shortages are not due to any hoarding or anything like that. Possibly it's a part of it, but a large part of it is that the provision of natural gas or the supply of natural gas has declined over time. So that is why its internal rate of return it keeps increasing. But from an economist point of view, for this example, if you start tracking internal rate of returns of a certain product, that might not show, a government official might say, or that there is no shortage of this thing in this country, or we are able to handle this and the supply would be ensured. But for a person who is tracking the shortages according to, in lieu of the internal rate of returns, a very good indicator for him or her, for the analyst, would be to look at that development of internal rate of return. Has it stayed the same over the long run? Has it increased? If it has increased or stayed the same, then it means that that kind of shortage which was there in the short run, it still persists, and this option of this product whose internal rate of return has remained the same, stubbornly the same, or it hasn't declined, there is still shortage of it, and there is still a lot more demand for it than there is supply. So one implication is, one thing that we can get out of it is that you as a policy analyst can tell the government planners or those who are the decision makers that, look, I've tracked it through the internal rate of returns and it still shows up a lot more than we would expect in the long run, despite the fact that there has been a lot more investment over there. So as an analyst, you would say that I believe that there is still shortage of supply and we need to increase that to bring it towards the equilibrium level. We need to ensure that more investments come in so that this supply situation could be increased. So this is one of those cases where you can advise something based on what you looked at from the point of view of internal rate of returns. Let's move on. The third application, does the regulation cause harm to an industry? Is it harmful? Is it not harmful? What is it? Governments are in the process of regulating. They regulate a lot of activity, economic activity. They regulate a lot more stuff than we can consider. They regulate markets. They regulate driving, for example. Car usage. They regulate the use of water. They regulate the use of gas. You have OGRA, Oil and Gas Regulatory Authority. So there is this word, regulatory authority. Then you have NEPRA, which is the National Electricity Power Regulatory Authority. So you have regulation over there too. So there are a lot of areas where government regulation comes in, and the reason for regulation is that they, the basic reason for regulating a certain practice is, in economics at least, from an economist point of view, is that government wants to stop or decrease at least the harmful effects of an activity. Those harmful effects are known as externalities in economics. So what could be an example of industry? That in an industry, government would want to establish an industry. Yes, they would. But that industry, that waste coming out of that industry, how do they dump it? If they dump it on the grounds and in the open air, it's hazardous. It's for the people. For the people living around that place, it's an externality because it causes harm. So there, in that case, the scope for government regulation, it comes in automatically. That government steps in and regulates and says that, look, to the industries, that look, it is your activity that is inadvertently causing harm to the people. So you need to make sure that whatever you throw out in terms of garbage or in terms of the products that you use, the chemicals that you dump, you need to take care of it so that it doesn't harm the people. So this is one good example of how governments regulate. Their regulation is almost present everywhere in every aspect of economic life. Example, the United States drug manufacturers appealed to the government in the 1960s not to introduce regulations because these will prove to be a huge disincentive for innovation, research and the introduction of new drugs. Indirectly what they were stating was that with regulations the industry would become unprofitable and investment will go elsewhere. अब ये सबसे मशहूर एक केस है रेगुलेशंस का, और यहाँ से फिर एक तहरीक शुरू हुई कि रेगुलेशन को इतनी हार्मफुल भी नहीं होती जिस तरह प्रिटेंड किया जाता है, और गवर्नमेंट ने काफ़ी हद तक बहुत सी चीज़ों को रेगुलेट करना शुरू किया. इसके बाद फिर 1960s में 70s में इन्वायरमेंटल रेगुलेशंस भी आ गई थी. पहले किसी ने ये नहीं सोचा कि इन्वायरमेंट की भी कोई रेगुलेशन हो सकती है, उसके लिए क्या ज़रूरत है. पर जब आस्ता आस्ता पता चलना शुरू हुआ कि नहीं, इन्वायरमेंट को ये जो ह्यूमन एक्टिविटी है, इंडस्ट्रियल एक्टिविटी है, या रोज़मर्रा के काम है, गाड़ियाँ चलाना होगी, ये वो होगी, इस तरह की चीज़ें होगी, इनके साइड इफ़ेक्ट्स हैं. सो इनकी रेगुलेशन भी ज़रूरी है. नाउ मुझे एक और मिसाल भी याद आ रही है बड़ी मशहूर इसी सिलसिले में. آج کل آپ ایک چیز نوٹس کیجئے گا, جو بھی آپ لوگ میں سے گاڑی چلاتا ہے, پیٹرول ڈلواتا ہے, کبھی یہ نوٹس کیجئے گا کہ جو آج کل جو پیٹرول مل رہا ہے اس میں ایک ورائٹی خاص ایسی ہوتی ہے جس میں لیڈ کی پرسنٹیج جو ہوتی ہے, لیڈ ایک ایلیمنٹ ہے, لیڈ کی پرسنٹیج وہ آلموسٹ زیرو ہوتی ہے, یا لیڈ فری ہوتا ہے وہ آئل. اب ریگولیشن یہ ریکوائر کرتی ہے کہ اٹ از لیڈ فری. ایک وقت میں ایک زمانے میں پیٹرول میں یہ کیمیکل نیچرلی ہوتا ہے, اس میں ملتا ہے, تو ایک زمانے میں اس کی کوئی ریگولیشن نہیں تھی, جو لیڈ والا پیٹرول تھا وہی چلتا رہتا تھا, وہی گاڑیوں میں ڈلواتے تھے. لیکن پھر اس کا ایک بڑا خطرناک قسم کا سائیڈ افیکٹ آیا جو کہ ریسرچ نے پروف کیا. یہاں پہ تو انفارچونیٹلی ایسی کوئی ریسرچ نہیں ہے, لیکن امریکہ میں ایک ریسرچ ہوئی, اس میں یہ دیکھا گیا کہ ایک مخصوص علاقہ, میرے خیال میں کیلیفورنیا تھا, کہ جہاں پہ یہ جو لیڈ والا پیٹرول ہے وہاں پہ ایک چیز آبزرو کی گئی, اگین آبزرویشن, اینڈ دس واز اے ویری اسٹیوٹ آبزرویشن, کہ جو بچے ہیں وہ ان کی طبیعت جو ہے وہ بہت جارحانہ ہوتی جا رہی ہے, اور وہ جو ہے ان کا اٹینشن اسپین جو ہے وہ کم ہوتا جا رہا ہے, ان کو مختلف خون کی بیماریاں ان میں پیدا ہو رہی ہیں. اس طرح کی آبزرویشنز آنا شروع ہوئی. کس طرح انہوں نے نوٹس کرنا شروع کی کہ ہسپتالوں میں بہت زیادہ یہ شکایت آنا شروع ہوگی بچوں کے جو ڈاکٹرز تھے ان کے پاس, کہ بچے کا بالکل موڈ بدل گیا ہے, بہت زیادہ جارحانہ ہو گیا ہے, ہی از پریٹی اگریسو, child is pretty aggressive, he didn't used to be like that, and his attention span is decreasing, and he's having trouble, several types of trouble, skin rashes, blood problems. So this was an observation. So when it started to climb up, یہ چیزیں جو ہیں بڑھنا شروع ہوئی, تو اس کا پھر باقاعدہ انہوں نے آبزرو کیا گیا اس چیز کو کہ واقعی یہ ایک جنرل سا پیٹرن بن گیا ہے کہ یہ اس طرح کی چیزیں ہو رہی ہیں, اس طرح کے واقعات ہو رہے ہیں. اس کو پھر ٹیسٹ کیا گیا, خون کے نمونے لیے گئے بچوں کے سائیکولوجیکل ٹیسٹ کیے گئے. یہ بات سامنے آئی کہ ان کے جسم میں لیڈ کا لیول جو ہے وہ جتنا ہونا چاہیے اس سے بہت زیادہ ہے, اور یہ ان کے ساتھ بھی تھا, گرون اپس کے ساتھ بھی تھا, لیکن بچوں کے لیے بڑا خطرناک اس لیے تھا کیونکہ ایٹ اے گروئنگ ایج you need to stay away from the children need to stay away from these things, because then when they become mature that can give rise to certain diseases which could be life threatening. Anyway, جب یہ چیز پتہ چلی تو فوراً یونائٹڈ اسٹیٹس گورنمنٹ کو کہا گیا کہ لیڈ کی وجہ سے, جو لیڈ والا پیٹرول ہے جس میں لیڈ اتنی پرسنٹیج ہوتی ہے نیچرلی اکرنگ, تو اس کی وجہ سے یہ مسائل پیدا ہو رہے ہیں. So government stepped in immediately and required that the petrol, there is a certain limit above which there wouldn't be that much lead in the petrol. یعنی ایک certain percentage تک lead ہونی چاہیے, ٹھیک ہے, کیونکہ اس میں نیچرلی اکرنگ ہوتی ہے, لیکن اس سے زیادہ نہیں ہونی چاہیے کیونکہ وہ ہارمفل ہے. یہ بھی کیلکولیشنز پہ بیس تھا. But now we have come to a situation over years, many years, it took 30 to 40 years, کہ اب وہ جو پیٹرول ہے now it is lead free. A lot of most of it is lead free. I don't know if they still sell that leaded oil, but anyway, this was an example of regulation and how it came about, the dimension or the process through which a regulation came about. So over here what we were studying before I digressed and gave you another example, real world, what went over here is that the drug administration or the pharmaceutical companies, they went to the government and said that whatever regulations are you intending, it would harm the industry because people would find a disincentive. There wouldn't be that much innovation, there wouldn't be that much investment coming over here. People would go over to other countries, and there wouldn't be any new innovative drugs. So government should stop with that. But that did not happen. Over time the government and the private sector made several studies based on IRR in the drug industry. It showed that despite the regulation and restrictions, IRR in the industry has remained pretty healthy. Again, جیسا کہ میں نے ابھی سے پہلے وہ ایگزامپل میں کہا کہ کوئی ٹریک کر رہا ہوتا ہے اس IRR کو, انٹرنل ریٹ آف ریٹرن کو, تو اس سے بھی پتہ لگ سکتا ہے कि डिस्पाइट ये कि इंडस्ट्री वाले शोर मचा रहे थे कि हम तबाह हो गए हैं, हमारे लिए बड़ा मसला है, इन्वेस्टमेंट चली जाएगी, लेकिन जो कि ट्रैक कर रहे थे उस इंटरनल रेट ऑफ रिटर्न का गवर्नमेंट में या प्राइवेट सेक्टर में, उन्होंने ये देखा कि इंटरनल रेट ऑफ रिटर्न अच्छी है, बुरी नहीं है, यानी एज एन इन्वेस्टमेंट वो अभी भी अच्छा एक ऑप्शन है। ड्रग इंडस्ट्री, फार्मास्यूटिकल इंडस्ट्री, डिस्पाइट द फैक्ट के हुकूमत उसको रेगुलेट कर रही है, पहले रेगुलेशन नहीं थी। So in questions concerning public policy in the form of regulation, there needs to be an appreciation of the IRR of the industry over time to see the effects of the regulation. अब देखें, अब पब्लिक पॉलिसी का यहाँ पे एक और इम्प्लीकेशन आ गई कि इंडस्ट्री के हिसाब से देख रहे हैं कि वहाँ पे रेगुलेशन होनी चाहिए नहीं होनी चाहिए। तो अगर IRR किसी एक खास स्पेसिफिक इंडस्ट्री, मसलन यहाँ पे फार्मास्यूटिकल इंडस्ट्री थी, उसकी ट्रैक की जाए ओवर टाइम, तो उससे पता लग सकता है कि प्रॉफिट्स उसमें कैसे हैं, उसमें इन्वेस्टमेंट कैसी है, इज इट स्टिल अ गुड इन्वेस्टमेंट। क्योंकि अगर अच्छी इन्वेस्टमेंट ना होती तो IRR गिर जाता, कम पड़ जाता, लेकिन अगर IRR तकरीबन सेम ही है, अपनी जगह पे ठहरा हुआ है, उसमें बहुत कोई तब्दीली नहीं है बल्कि ज़्यादा ऊपर जा रहा है, तो इसका ये मतलब है कि नहीं, अभी भी वो प्रॉफिटेबल इंडस्ट्री है हुकूमत के रेगुलेशंस के बावजूद। सो ये एक केस था कि जिसमें जो इंडस्ट्री वाले लोग थे जिन्होंने कहा कि नहीं, आप लोग ये ना करें, ये रेगुलेशंस ना इम्पोज करें क्योंकि इसकी वजह से नुकसान पहुंचेगा और इंडस्ट्री तबाह हो जाएगी। वो गलत साबित हुई और जो उनकी एक उन्होंने प्रेडिक्शन की थी, उन्होंने गवर्नमेंट को डराने की कोशिश की थी कि जी देखें ओवर टाइम फिर सारी चीज़ें ख़त्म हो जाएगी इंडस्ट्री और लोग सारे दूसरे ममालिक चले जाएंगे। वो गलत साबित हुई क्योंकि ओवर टाइम उनका इंटरनल रेट ऑफ रिटर्न या सेम रहा या ज़्यादा होता गया। मतलब ये था कि अभी भी एज एन इन्वेस्टमेंट अपॉर्चुनिटी इट वाज प्रीटी अट्रैक्टिव। सो एज अ पब्लिक पॉलिसी एनालिस्ट, whenever you are confronted with these kinds of questions, then it is important to take this dimension into consideration too, about internal rate of returns and what they imply. That would be, I believe, it for the examples. If there are any in the future, we'll definitely let you know. I'll definitely let you know that this is concerning the IRR. For the moment, it's about it. Now, we just discussed one thing, the long run equilibrium, how it comes about. And now we are getting into the graphical stuff. I need to explain this to you so that any confusion remaining in the minds of those who haven't gone through economics, I'm sure there is some confusion about the long run, the short run, how do these curves move, how do these curves, what we do with it and what we don't. This is some basic stuff which I'll be going through. So before I go through this one, how about I draw a simple demand and supply curve and try to make you understand what it actually is, so that it's easier for you to go through this stuff. I'll try to be as simple as possible to try to make you understand. As I said, for those of you who have already taken economics, it's not difficult at all. But for those of you who haven't taken economics, let's get a start with this and try to make sense of it, what it is. Yes, let's start from over here. My line making isn't that good. Anyway, this is a very simple one, trying to make you understand what this all is about. Let's see over here. Now, for drawing a demand curve, what exactly is a demand curve? Well, demand curve, it shows a relationship between the total quantity demanded and the price. So when the price varies, the quantity demanded varies too, and there is a negative relationship between them. So suppose at a certain price you want to buy a certain quantity, what would happen if the price increases? Let me plot a demand curve, a downward sloping, and you can see why it's a downward sloping, it's a downward coming demand curve. So over here, if I can move this cursor over here, yes, here it is. So let's draw a demand curve from over here downwards, just like this. Downward sloping demand curve. Again, sorry, I'm not very attuned to these things, but trying to explain it as simple as possible. line might be not that straight. I'm not very good at drawing, was never good at it, but this is just for your explanation. So anyway, here it is, the demand curve that is coming down. Suppose for the sake of argument that now I am intending to buy a certain quantity at a certain price. Suppose this is the price, y-axis, or this one is the price, and the horizontal axis is the quantity. Perhaps I should write it down over here. This is P, the price, and this over here is Q, the quantity. So on the y-axis you have price, and on the x-axis you have quantity. So let's draw something. Suppose the price is this much. It meets the demand curve over here. Bring it down over here to meet the horizontal axis, and this would be the quantity demanded. But what happens now when the price falls? It's already too high. Let us look at what happens when the price falls. Suppose the price falls, price comes over here. What happens to the quantity? Aha. So we see over here, when the price falls from here to here, you have an increase in quantity demanded from here to here. So once over there on the y-axis you have one thing falling, but on the other hand you have one thing increases, which means something, which means that there is a negative relationship. If one thing decreases, the other would increase. Suppose again over here I use this curve, and the price comes down further, and it is okay, there it is. Oh, it has gone outside, which it shouldn't, but let's bring it over here. Again you saw a decrease in prices. Sorry, there seems to be some problem with this thing. Anyway, here you go, the price decreases again. Just trying to make a simple explanation out of it. So don't mind the graphs. They are not that beautiful, they are not very good to look at, but with that decrease again you will see again that there is an increase in quantity demanded. So if you plot all these points over here, you look at this point over here, this one, and this one, and then this one, you combine them, and this is your demand curve, which would be downward sloping because there is a negative relationship between demand and supply, demand and the price, sorry, not supply, demand and the price. So this is the demand curve, which if you see the picture in the presentation, it is the D curve. They have written it demand over there. This is taken from Investopedia. It is written over there, so giving the credit where it is due. So let's now draw the supply curve. So here we are again. You have this y axis and x axis. We've already drawn the supply demand curve. Now we'll draw the supply curve. How do we get the supply curve? Supply curve has a positive relationship with the price, so it's upward sloping, unlike the demand curve. And we will see why that is the case by just drawing the curve over here. You'll get an idea of what it is. So I draw a line like this. This is an upward sloping supply curve. Why is it upward sloping? Let us see. Suppose the price is over here, this much. This is the price, it meets the horizontal curve over here. Sorry again, but as I said, I'm not very good at this thing. But stay with me, this is just a simple explanation. Doesn't have to be very complicated. This is the price, this is the quantity. So you see that at this point, this very point, when the price meets, when the price is this much, the quantity demanded is this much. So when the price goes up, it meets the supply curve over here, and the quantity goes up too. So over here what you see is that once the price goes up, the quantity increases too. Then again, if you draw this one, so what you see over here in this hardly legible drawing, but hopefully their understanding wouldn't be that difficult, is that when you increase the price from a seller's, this is from a seller's point of view, demand curve was from a point of view of the consumer. So what you see over here is that once you increase the price, then the quantity supplied increases too. You further increase the price, the quantity supplied increases further. Thus there is a positive relationship. You are increasing one thing on the y-axis, the other thing on the x-axis is increasing too. And remember, in the demand curve, when you are increasing the price, the demand is going the other way. But in contrast over here, when you are increasing the price, the quantity supplied increases too. So there is a positive relationship. That is why this supply curve, this is upward sloping, going upward rather than downward. So this is very simple basics of demand and supply, which hopefully you would have understood. It's not a problem at all. It's a child's play for those who've already taken economics, but for those of you who haven't, it shouldn't be difficult too. If you have to want more clear pictures, you can already see, you can see it in the notes, you can see in the textbook, or you can just search it on the net, demand and supply and equilibrium, like I did and stated one over here, just for my convenience. Not that I want to copy this kind of stuff, but just for my convenience and for a good presentation to you, because as I said, I'm not very good at drawing this kind of stuff over here. I don't have the practice. But anyway, you saw the demand and supply thing. Now let's move towards what exactly an equilibrium comes about. So again, let's draw this stuff. Let's see what it is. Yes, here you are. Let's draw the demand curve. It comes down like this. And let's draw the supply curve, which goes upward like this. So you see that these are two perspectives. One is from the supplier's point of view, one is from the demander's point of view, or the consumer's point of view. Consumer's point of view is represented by the demand curve, the supplier's point of view is being represented by the supply curve. So over here, where they meet, these curves meet, or where these perspectives meet, that would be the price where the seller would be happy to sell his product on that price, and the demander or the consumer would be happy, or not exact, maybe not happy, but satisfied that this is the price that I can get my product in. So here is the point where this equilibrium takes place, where they cross each other. This one, yes, over here. And if you draw it like this, it meets the price y-axis over here, and draw it over here, it meets the x-axis over here. This P1, let us say this is going to be P1, and this Q1. P1 and Q1 are your equilibrium demand and supply prices. What this means, equilibrium price actually means over here at this very point, which let us call this point O, which is the point of equilibrium. I darken it a bit, this one. This is where the demand and supply curves meet. So what is happening over here is that this is from the perspective of both the consumer and the producer. This is the point where they'd be satisfied. Perhaps they wouldn't like to be, consumer would like to be go as low as possible the prices, but producer won't like that, and the producer would like the prices to be as high as possible so that he can profit more from production, but the consumer wouldn't buy it. So this is the point where they are both kind of satisfied that look, okay, I wouldn't be able to get my most wanted price, the consumer would say, but this is pretty much satisfactory because the producer has to get something too in return, and the producer is also satisfied that I am getting something. So this is called the equilibrium price. Now notice two things over here that we will be discussing later. You can see this triangle over here, and you can see another one over here, which is below the equilibrium curve. These two triangles, one is the consumer surplus, this one over here is the producer surplus. My writing isn't that bad actually, but this is what happens with this kind of over here writing on this one. But anyway, hopefully this is understandable and legible. Why is this a consumer surplus? Why is this a consumer surplus, and why is this a producer surplus? Understand this. Look over here. If I take you to this point, suppose now this one, this demand curve can go over here and meet the price or the y-axis over here. So suppose if this is as high as the price can go for the consumer, but now see that the consumer is paying a much lower price over here. Instead of this point, consumer is paying at this point, which is P1. So instead of paying a very high price, which is the one as I just pointed out with near P, consumer is paying a lower price, which is P1. That is where its surplus comes in, where he's realizing a saving that he doesn't have to pay that much. Consumer surplus इस मामले में देखें, अगर हम बिल्कुल ऊपर तक जाएं पॉइंट P तक, कि जहाँ पे डिमांड कर्व मीट करती है y एक्सिस को, तो ये वो सबसे एक ज़्यादा कीमत हो सकती है. लेकिन आप देखें कि यहाँ पे इक्विलिब्रियम में कंज्यूमर को वो कीमत पे नहीं करना पड़ रही, कंज्यूमर उससे कम पे कर रहा है, जो खरीदार है उससे कम पे कर रहा है. तो ये जो इन दोनों कीमतों के दरमियान फ़र्क हो गया P और P1 के दरमियान, वो कंज्यूमर की बचत होगी, जिसे कंज्यूमर का सरप्लस हम कहते हैं. अब इसी तरह आप आ जाएं जिससे प्रोड्यूसर सरप्लस की तरफ, तो आप ये चीज़ इसमें नोटिस करेंगे कि जो सप्लाई कर्व है वो ओरिजिन से आके यहाँ पे, यानी ये जो नीचे हॉरिजॉन्टल कर्व्स वगैरह हैं वो इससे यहाँ पे आके मिलती है इस पॉइंट पे. सपोज इसको हम पॉइंट को कहते हैं ओरिजिन पॉइंट OR, ठीक है जी. और ये वो सबसे कम प्राइस हो सकती है कि जिस पे कंज्यूमर खरीद सकता है, यानी बिल्कुल ही प्राइस ना होने के बराबर, बिल्कुल मुफ्त के बराबर. लेकिन इसके बरक्स आप देखेंगे कि प्रोड्यूसर कहाँ पे बेच रहा है, इसको प्राइस P1 पे बेच रहा है, यानी उससे जो ऊपर प्राइस है उस पे बेच रहा है, जिससे उसको बेचने से मुनाफा हो रहा है. तो यानी उसको भी बचत हो रही है, और ये उसकी बचत जो है, ये सारा ट्राइंगल जो है ये कंज्यूमर, ये प्रोड्यूसर सरप्लस का है. ये होते बराबर हैं. मैंने दरअसल तस्वीर ऐसी बनाई है, इस पर मुझे बहुत ज़्यादा प्रैक्टिस नहीं है, लेकिन आपकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग के लिए बनाई है ताकि आप लोग ये सीख सकें. जस्ट टू मेक यू अंडरस्टैंड, ये सिर्फ आपको समझाने के लिए बनाई है ताकि आप लोगों के लिए आसानी हो जाए. दिस इज कंज्यूमर सरप्लस एंड द अबव वन इज कंज्यूमर सरप्लस एंड दिस इज प्रोड्यूसर सरप्लस. अब जब चेंजेस आती है डिमांड और सप्लाई में, तो ये कंज्यूमर और प्रोड्यूसर सरप्लस जो होते हैं ये बदल जाते हैं, और किसी ना किसी पे ज़्यादा इफेक्ट पड़ता है, किसी पे कम इफेक्ट पड़ता है. किस तरह बढ़ता है, इसमें और भी कॉन्सेप्ट्स आते हैं जो कि आगे जाके हम देखेंगे. अभी बहुत सी ड्राइंग्स हैं, बहुत से कॉन्सेप्ट्स हैं जो हमने सीखने हैं. सो होपफुली ये चीज़ आपको समझ में आ गई होगी. ये चीज़ ग्रास्प करना जो है, इस चीज़ को समझना ज़रा ज़रूरी है. एनीवे, लेट्स रैप दिस ऑफ. So we just went through the basics of demand and supply with the not very beautiful diagram, but one that was understandable, and hopefully it was easily understandable. Just wanted to go through some of the concepts like that. So what is happening over here now in this picture? Let me just shortly explain it. What is happening over here is that initially we are carrying on from previous discussion about those shortages that we just did in terms of IRR. So I'm just giving you an example of the equilibrium, then the change in the short run, and then what we would expect in the long run. So these are two diagrams. You can see in the first one where P star and the Q star, there is equilibrium between supply and demand. They represent a steady state where there is equilibrium between price and the quantity. That equilibrium has been established. Now there occurs a situation for any reason, as I gave in the example, that one of the products, it garners a higher price, its price goes up, उसकी कीमत बढ़ जाती है उसकी, तो वो उसको how do you represent that? You can easily see that over here. I'm taking the cursor with it just to make it explain. I'm moving the cursor with these things. It would be easier for you to understand. So what happens over here is when the price goes up, this is reflected by this one arrow that the price is going up from over here to here. When the price goes up and the supply and the demand remain same, what happens is that the price meets the demand curve over here and meets the supply curve over here, this place, which means that the supply and demand, there is a difference between them. We discussed in one of the previous entries too कि जो डिमांड और सप्लाई के दरमियान एक डिफरेंस क्रिएट हो जाता है जब कीमतें बदलती है. अब यहाँ पे कीमत बदल गई है, अचानक उसकी प्रोडक्ट जो है उसकी कीमत बढ़ गई है किसी भी वजह से, तो वो उसकी कीमत बढ़ने के अगर आप इसको एक्सटेंड करें इधर तक सप्लाई कर्व तक, तो होनी यहाँ पे यह चाहिए कि सप्लाई उसकी बढ़ जानी चाहिए, यहाँ तक आएगी. लेकिन यहाँ पे आप डिमांड देखेंगे जो कीमत की वजह से, जब कीमत बढ़ गई है, जैसा कि हमने कहा था कि देयर इज अ नेगेटिव रिलेशनशिप, यहाँ पे डिमांड जो है उसकी यहाँ तक होगी कि जो क्वांटिटी डिमांडेड होगी यहाँ पे होगी, लेकिन क्वांटिटी सप्लाइड जो होगी, जो कि इसको एक्सटेंड करेंगे लाइन को इधर सप्लाई कर्व के साथ आगे मिलेगी, वो यहाँ पे आनी चाहिए. तो वो इन दोनों के दरमियान एक डिफरेंस क्रिएट हो जाएगा. बट एनीवे व्हाट हैपेंस ओवर हियर इज दैट it decreases, the supply decreases, right? And this decrease in supply is shown by the movement of supply curve to the left hand side. So supply curve, which is this one, remember this format, supply and demand. So this is the same supply curve over here. What happens is that a shortage in supply or a negative shock to supply, when it happens, it takes the supply curve back to this place. Now if you extend this supply curve over here, it meets the demand over here, which means that the supply and demand equilibrium over here, the new one with the higher price, would be here, and extend it over here. This would be the new price. Now extend it downwards to the horizontal curve, and the new quantity demanded would come over here, this one, which is what we expect with the increase in higher price. अब यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है, जो for our discussion what is important over here is that we are expecting the IRR to go up. Why? Because the price has risen, the price of product A has risen in the short run, and this happens because there is a negative supply shock which reduces the quantity of that product A against the demand. So this negative shock over here, when it reduces the quantity, it increases the price, but with the increase in price there is also an increase in the internal rate of return, which makes it very attractive for the investors who would try to come in to this industry, which produces the industry for the production of product A, and try to make use of those higher internal rate of returns. Again, let me simplify it. आपको सादा से अल्फाज में बता देता हूँ यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है, not just to confuse you. कि यहाँ पे ये हो रहा है कि जो इक्विलिब्रियम और यहाँ पे एस्टेब्लिश हुआ हुआ ऑलरेडी इस पॉइंट पे, जहाँ पे प्राइस है पी नॉट और पी स्टार इनफैक्ट, और क्यू स्टार जो है क्वांटिटी है इस पे इक्विलिब्रियम पे, ये सप्लाई कर्व है, ये डिमांड कर्व है. अब हुआ ये कि कोई भी एक ऐसा एक्सोजेनस शॉक आ गया है, एंडोजेनस शॉक यानी इंटरनल और एक्सटर्नल शॉक आ गया, जिसकी वजह से एक प्रोडक्ट यानी प्रोडक्ट है जो इस तरह के हमने अपने एग्जांपल में इस्तेमाल की थी, वो कम होगी डिमांड के मुकाबले में. डिमांड उसकी वहीं पे है, लेकिन उसकी जो रसद है, तलब वहीं पे है, रसद यानी सप्लाई उसकी कम होगी. उस कम सप्लाई को हम किस तरह शो करते हैं, जो सप्लाई कर्व है वो लेफ्ट पे शिफ्ट हो जाती है. जब लेफ्ट पे वो शिफ्ट होती है, दिस इज द फर्स्ट स्टेप हाउ यू गो अबाउट इट. व्हेन यू शिफ्ट इट ओवर लेफ्ट, तो जो अभी पहले की डिमांड कर्व है जो पहले से है, वो कहाँ पे इसको मीट करती है, जहाँ पे ये क्रॉस करेंगे वहां पे इसकी नई प्राइस आएगी, जो कि पहले इसके मुकाबले में ज्यादा है. और کوانٹٹی ڈیمانڈڈ جو ہوگی وہ ذرا کم ہو جائے گی کیونکہ قیمت اس کی زیادہ ہوگی ہے. بہت سے کیسز ایسے ہیں جس میں کوانٹٹی ڈیمانڈڈ پہ اتنا فرق نہیں پڑتا, لیکن دس از سمپل انالیسس, وہ بعد میں ایکسپلین کروں گا میں کہ کیوں نہیں پڑتا. لیکن یہ پھر نئی پرائس ہوگی جو کہ پہلے سے ہائر ہوگی. جب پرائس بڑھ جائے گی, جب قیمت بڑھ جائے گی, تو اس کی IRR اس پروڈکٹ کی بھی بڑھ جائے گی, جو اس کی وجہ سے وہ انویسٹر کے لیے بڑی اٹریکٹیو ہو جائے گی. پھر اس کے بعد لانگ رن میں کیا ہوتا ہے وہ نیکسٹ اس میں ڈسکس کریں گے نیکسٹ لیکچر میں. فار دا مومنٹ آئی تھنک یو ہیڈ انف آف دس, سو اٹس ٹائم ٹو ٹیک اے بریک and we'll discuss it in the next lecture. Just a short summary, we discussed few of the practical applications of IRR. One was economic shortage and the other was regulations, and we went through some of the basics of supply and demand. So hopefully this would be easily understood. You've had a good time. I'll go through this stuff again just to make you understand, but hopefully this isn't much difficult. So see you around next time. Take care. Allah Hafiz.